Be they stalwart protectors clad in plate, powerful druids shapeshifted into towering bears, elusive monks, or mighty demon hunters, the tank is the character that protects their friends. But how do you tank? Well, let me show you. Hello there and welcome to the Tanking Guide. Over this series of videos we'll discuss everything you need to know to become a master tank. In our last lesson we learned about a few useful add-ons for tanking, including a small tutorial for how to set up weak auras, one of the most powerful add-ons in the game. In this lesson we'll be returning to tanking philosophy, to discuss working with groups and pacing yourself. This is something that I've personally seen trip up a lot of otherwise great tanks, and even in a pickup group, poor pacing can not only be awkward, but it can lead to wipes and can even be the nail in the coffin for a potential run through a dungeon or a raid. We'll be discussing two very important aspects of tanking in this lesson: communication and pacing. Now, let's get started. We'll start with communication since it's the more general aspect of the two. Communication takes many forms when it comes to tanking, but let's take a moment to define it here. Effective communication is the act of succinctly letting the people around you know the important aspects that are, or are going to, affect your ability to tank. Let's break that down. Letting people around you know the important aspects that are, or are going to, affect you. This can be anything from incoming spikes of damage, a sudden burst of lag, a need to repair your gear, eating food for extra stats, or even something like your healer running low on mana. Any of these things will affect your ability to tank, and the people around you will need to know about it. But it's also important to note that things outside of the game can affect your ability to tank as well. A real-life emergency can pull you away from your computer at potentially any time, and people need to know about this. This ties into pacing, which we'll discuss in just a little bit. Okay, so there are quite a few things that need to be communicated to the people you're tanking for, but how do we go about actually telling them? Perhaps you've seen add-ons that automate the communication of things like interrupts or cooldowns, automatically letting the party or raid know when a certain survivability cooldown is used, or when someone interrupts. This is not the same as communicating important aspects that are or are going to affect your ability to tank. Communicating something like broken gear, a lag spike, your healer being low on mana, or a real-life emergency requiring your attention is always something that you are going to need to do manually. This is where you are going to need to speak in party or raid chat. If you're in a 5-man and you suddenly need to run away from your computer for 30 seconds, say so. If you need a moment to let your healer regenerate mana, let the damage dealers know about it. Chances are, they will not be keeping an eye on their healer's mana. If anything is going to prohibit your ability to tank for more than 10 or so seconds at a time, people need to know. Why? Well, let's discuss pacing to illustrate that. Let's create an example situation to demonstrate poor pacing. A 5-man dungeon group forms, and the tank starts pulling trash. They perform the typical pacing method of pulling a group of trash right as the group they're tanking is about to die. The group makes fairly good progress through the dungeon, pulling group after group to get to the first boss. The group kills the first boss, no problem. The group makes their way to the next boss, the tank pulling as before at a fairly decent pace. Then, out of the blue, the tank stops for some reason, and a damage dealer doesn't notice this. Assuming that the tank is going to continue their pace, they move forward into the next group of trash, accidentally pull it, and are killed. The trash could then go for the healer who may have tried to save the errant damage dealer, and 15 seconds later, the tank returns to try and regain control of a chaotic situation. As we discussed in the control section, losing control of a situation like this can destroy a run. So, who is at fault here? It's easy to pin the blame on the damage dealers for not noticing that the tank stopped, but in my opinion, the issue was a complete lack of communication from the tank. They set a fairly quick pace throughout the dungeon, pulling trash packs at a decent rate, and then they simply stopped. This completely changed their pacing, and the rest of the group was not aware of this. This is why communication is vital, because any of the things we discussed earlier on in this video are things that can change the pace of a dungeon, and it is up to you as a tank to let the group know that your pace is about to change. While it is still possible for a member of your group to not notice communication, it is your duty as a tank to make it as obvious as possible, without being irritating, that something important is happening. Don't leave it up to the other members of the group to notice. Okay, so we understand that pacing is important, and while the actual pace you'll set as a tank depends upon your gear, your skill, your confidence, and the sort of content you're doing, it's important to note that the issue here is not the pace you set, but changing the pace that you set. Naturally, the best case scenario is that you never have to change your pace, you just keep pulling and everything goes fine. But sometimes you won't have a choice. To effectively communicate this, use the party or raid chat, or even use a /say, although be wary, /say has a limited range, and if anyone's more than 15 or so yards away from you, they'll not see it at all. Although it has the added advantage of popping up in a chat bubble, /say is not always effective. Consider using party or raid chat instead. That way it is always in the other members of the team's chat log. Be quick and succinct with your communication. If you have to deal with something in real life for 10 or 20 seconds, just type BRB RQ, which is short for be right back real quick. The best way I find to let people know that I'm stepping away from the computer for a very short period is to actually give them an estimation of how long I'll be gone. Instead of saying BRB, which is very vague and could potentially start a vote kick against you in a pickup group, consider saying something like BRB 20 seconds, which is much more useful as a piece of information. Additionally, consider letting people know why you need to stop. Something like sec or wait is again rather vague and can be quite worrying, but saying something like hold on, healer out of mana, or wait, repairing, or sec, lagging, provides a definitive reason as to why you're stopping. It is, of course, important to note that your goal is to never have a break in your pacing, so do your best to only tank when you're fairly certain you won't have to suddenly disappear. Now, before we conclude, it's important to take a moment to discuss how to deal with people who criticize your reasoning for breaking your pace. Criticism is something that every tank is going to have to deal with, so much so that we'll be discussing it in the next lesson. So here is a quick piece of advice. Take criticism on the chin and be as humble as you can. Even if you're in good or even fantastic gear, you are not better than the rest of your group. Even if the criticism coming at you is born of ignorance, it is your role as a tank to help the group succeed, and there is no reason to pull it apart just because someone got irritated that you needed to step away from your computer for 30 seconds. You'll never see them again, so don't let it bother you. That will conclude this lesson about communication and pacing. Both play an important role in successful tanking, and will definitely be returning to communication when we discuss working with other tanks and difficult players. Do your best to let others know what's going on and never be afraid of telling them that you need a moment, or even a little while, to get something sorted out. It's better that they know than them being in the dark and expecting your assistance when it's not available. In our next lesson, we'll be discussing dealing with difficult players and situations. If half of your party runs left and half of it runs right, what on earth should you do? If someone pulls a huge group of enemies for you and you're scared that it's going to kill you, how do you react? What if you wipe because the healer can't keep up? These are difficult situations, and handling them properly can be the difference between a completed run and extreme frustration. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, or suggestions, you can contact me using the links in the description, or you can just leave a comment. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I wish you the best of luck in the world of Warcraft.